Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Hi, today I'm going to talk about a subject which is not fit for children. So, just as a preamble, if you haven't hit puberty yet, please stop watching this video and go watch another one of mine or some other video. It won't be particularly interesting, won't really make any sense, is especially important, and might be misleading without certain life experience. So, that out of the way, I need to start with the background to why I'm doing this video at all. I've been talking with a friend of mine about why certain iconoclasts like to destroy beauty, like ISIS in the Middle East, or the Jacobins during the French Revolution. I think it was them, or is it the Jacobites? I'm blanking on that at the moment. Anyway, the people in the French Revolution destroyed amazing amounts of beauty, especially in religious art. Why did these people do it? We were talking about this subject, and I made an analogy to S&M, in particular, to why is it, especially, DOMs. And then I ended up explaining this, and then he pointed out he's never really heard actually a good explanation for this before, at least the one I gave, and suggested I make a video about it. So, well, this one's doing it for him. And to forestall the obvious question, this is not from personal experience, just an understanding of it. Though I did run it by a friend of mine who is experienced with this, and she confirmed that my understanding of it is correct. Okay, so to begin with, we have to start with what sex actually is before we can talk about any sort of variant of it. And so sex begins with, or the sexual act, very properly speaking, is a reproductive act. And it is something, in the act of reproduction, has some really, really amazing qualities to it, amongst the things which human beings do. The first thing, obviously, is that it makes a new person. But in doing so, it does several things to the people who make this new person. One of them is that each one is paying the other a really unfathomably large compliment. Because in doing an act where you are making a new person with a person, and no, by the way, I'm talking about, what sex really is, from which everything else derives its power, not any sort of variants that people have come up with that are missing portions of this. When you are reproducing with somebody, you are paying them an astonishing compliment because you are telling that person, in action, not in word, but in action, I want my descendants to be descended from you. I can't think of any compliment within the natural world higher than that. The people most dear to me in my life, my children, I want them to be descended from you. There's pretty much nothing equal to that. So first off, you have one of the most amazing compliments it is possible to pay a person, and moreover, in action, not words. Second, you are binding yourself to another person incredibly. Now, this is if you are going to be a decent parent. If you're going to be a horrible parent, then obviously you're not. But if you're going to be a decent parent, the thing is, a child has rights in both of their parents. They have a right to their parents' time. They have a right to their parents' care. They have a right to their parents teaching them and providing knowledge and helping them to learn how in a practical sense to be a decent adult human being. A child has the rights to all these things from their parents, plural, which means that you should be around your child a lot, and so must the other parent be around the child a lot. Now, there's really no way around this other than the two of you being together a lot. And moreover, there are all sorts of things that, if you have very different policies, would really screw the child over. If you can't do something when you're with me, but you can do something when you're with the other parent, and you alternate back and forth, the poor child is going to get horrible whiplash and not be able to figure out a consistent way of living at the time when they are extremely vulnerable, childhood, and need some sort of stability in order to be able to figure out the world. So parents have to work out how they're going to parent, the various policies of parenting, and so on. And I'm talking, sort of in a natural sense before the topic of marriage comes into it. Effectively, you have to be married to each other regardless. It's pretty much irrelevant where you sleep at night. You have to work together a lot just from the fact that your child is owed care from both of you, and that care must be consistent in order for the child to really be able to receive it. So, you are binding yourself to another person in a really intense way where you can't really get away from them for more than, a few hours or maybe at most a few days at a time in exceptions. Now, if you're going about this well, you're, aware that you're intentionally binding yourself and you're doing it on purpose. And so you've got that. You are binding yourself. You're also, incidentally, destroying your life as a person who is not a parent. Because when you're not a parent, your life is just radically different from when you are. Because there are now people around, and it changes eventually once your children become adults, yeah. But for, 20 years of your life, plus, several, however long between your first and your last child. But, even just one child, 20 years of your life are going to be radically different until your child, longer these days, until your child is actually an adult and, on their own and in charge of themselves. You are putting so much time and effort into raising them. And moreover, it's not just that, like, a lot of things change. Like, you have a tremendous responsibility to take much smaller risks as a parent. Sensible risks. All life has to be lived by risks, but, like, you need to protect yourself because your child needs you so you can't get injured badly. There are a lot of things like that. Like, it's funny, I saw this, on a tiny scale. I pulled a muscle in my back one time. I couldn't pick my children up. It was a miserable several days when little ones, obviously, but I'm using it as an example, wanted to be picked up by their daddy. A completely reasonable request, but it hurt like crazy to do so and, stood a decent chance of injuring me, so I constantly had to say no. It's an example. People depend on you, and the fact that they're depending on you means that you're massively constrained in what you can do. So, no, by the way, don't take this in the wrong sense, because there's just lots of things you can do and lots of hobbies, and, you can even run a YouTube channel if you want. But it's a massive constraint. So it radically changes your life to do this thing. So it is destructive in a creative sort, creative destruction. But it is destructive of your life previously. It binds you tremendously to another person, and it is an enormous compliment. These are some of the salient factors about sex properly, reproductive sex, that makes it an astonishing thing for two human beings to do with each other. Now, when you take it outside of the context of this and look at things that are essentially team masturbation, just to keep it simple, I'm just talking about when people start using contraception. So there's absolutely zero chance of this happening. None of those things really apply. If there is a zero, effectively zero, because I know in theory everyone knows that contraception isn't perfectly effective, but on the other hand, everybody assumes that it is and acts as if it is. They do not act as if there is a slight chance that it will actually fail and they will suddenly become a parent. So the mere fact that they're, wrong doesn't change their approach. And so if you're not going to have a child, none of those things apply. And yet you have an entirely inbuilt sense that sex is something really, quite a lot more significant than shaking a person's hand. And yet contracepted, it really isn't. Okay, yeah, you can spread diseases or something, but, leaving diseases aside for a moment, so, assume two virgins. It really doesn't have any greater significance apart from the fact that it is a reproductive act. It has an enormous amount of emotional baggage attached by virtue of what it's supposed to be. There's a lot of ingrained knowledge, as well as, cultural knowledge about the fact of what it's supposed to be, and that this is something that should be guarded very carefully because it has such amazingly huge consequences to it. Well, but at some point you kind of figure out that it doesn't really, and especially for people who have any experience of it, although that's not necessary, that if you really truly think of it as team masturbation, at some point you're going to realize it doesn't really have, it doesn't have the emotional kick that you thought it should. It doesn't feel like it should. It's not really all that much. Consider that you can find magazines talking about how to spice up your sex life. Spicing up, radically altering your life, bringing a new person into the world, that is not something that needs spicing up in the real version of it. This is something that you're lucky if you psychologically survive. Not quite lucky, but you just take that metaphorically. But the very fact that people can talk about spicing it up means that they have realized that they're not doing anything very significant. You don't spice up one of the biggest events of your life. Nobody spices up fighting in a war because, it gets a little bit boring to nearly be killed every few seconds and to, possibly be killing other human beings. Nobody spices that up. Nobody spices up performing surgery to save somebody's life because, it's a little boring that you're saving a human being's life. Things that are truly significant don't need spicing up. Only things that don't really matter need spicing up. So, we come now to S&M. Because, of course, there's the obvious thing of, well, why would someone volunteer to be hurt? It's a little counterintuitive. Normally people try to not be hurt. Why would you want to hurt somebody? Again, kind of atypical. Well, these are attempts to recapture, and they're matching attempts to, but two approaches that need each other and work with each other to recapture some of the significance that was lost in turning the sexual act into team masturbation. Because it's still, team masturbation at its core, but the fact that So looking from the S part of it, so the Dom's perspective, the fact that somebody is willing to let you hurt them means that you are very important. And so it is bringing in the sense that this is not an ordinary act. People will shake anybody's hand, but you have to be pretty special if they'll, let you poke them with something sharp that really hurts, or, very few people will allow you to whip them. So if somebody's going to let you whip them, you must be really special. On the flip side, and it works, it's a complicated dynamic, of course, but on the flip side, there's sort of two things. But if somebody is willing to whip you, something important must be going on. This is a very atypical action. So it's got to actually have some real content, merely because people wouldn't normally do this sort of thing. It's also, there's an entire, sort of mindset to it, which I believe is called subspace, which is, sort of very, very loosely an altered state of consciousness. But the thing is, a lot of people can't endure being, hurt. A lot of people especially can't endure being hurt when they could choose otherwise to not be hurt. Most people take the very sensible option of saying, no, I don't want to be hurt. And when saying, no, I don't want to be hurt actually works, that's what most people will say. Which, of course, this is the thing, S&M is generally practiced as very, very consensual with safe words and, prior agreements beforehand and so on. It's movies aside, actually, I haven't even seen many movies. I don't really know what's in them about it. But, cultural reputation aside, it is actually, it is one of the most consensual activities that exists, because people genuinely negotiate carefully beforehand exactly what they're going to do, and then monitor during and so on. It's its own thing. Anyway, point is that in that case where a person could very easily just make it stop by saying so, the fact that they are not is exerting control. It's control over themselves, but it's also something very significant. The fact that this much control is being exercised itself matters. It's atypical. It's unusual. People don't normally do this. So if it's happening, there has to be something important here. It's that basic where there's smoke, there's fire sort of reaction. It's not actually so true. It's not correct exactly that there's something really deeply significant going on, but it feels like it precisely because this would not normally happen. People don't normally let this sort of thing happen. So the fact that you're able to control yourself and able to allow this means that something really significant is happening. And that, there's the reciprocal relationship where each one is essentially validating the other in what frankly kind of amounts to a circular argument where, that I matter because you're letting me do this. I matter because you're doing this to me. And moreover, because I'm, this from the sub's perspective, because the sub is letting somebody do something, it is, this is an important person, and the important person is then, interested in the sub, and you know, just is showing concern for the sub, not precisely in a conventional sense, but is paying very careful attention and monitoring closely and adjusting actions on the basis of concern, in that sort of sense. And so, in both directions, you have what amounts to the attempt to create a self-fulfilling prophecy, a circular argument if you want to call it that, but because people would never normally do this, there must be something significant. There must really be some spark of life here that in the normal lifeless team masturbation there clearly isn't, because casual sex bores everybody. I mean, just look at the way people react to it. They're transparently bored. They talk, it's almost funny how much they'll talk about not being bored, because nobody talks about how much they're not bored. Or lots of people also talk about how bored they are, and I'm having lots of casual sex with a person, but it's kind of growing stale. So, what if we add two people and a dog? Let's throw in some pumpkins or what? That whole whatever ridiculous thing you want to talk about there, or use as an example. The fact that people are looking for some way to stimulate things back into feeling like there's some vague purpose to what you're doing hints at just how bored people are with this. Just in case it comes up as a slight side note, not every act of sexual intercourse, in the proper sense, reproductive sexual intercourse, is effectively reproductive. We're species in which females don't really, advertise their ovulation, and people often have sex, during the portions of a woman's cycle in which she's not fertile. Okay, these things are properly, when it is in the context of people who are reproducing with each other, these things are properly understood as a celebration, a celebration of and remembrance of. Okay, until the first child, it's a looking forward to. It's a trying to make it happen. After the first child, it is a celebration, remembrance of the thing that they did that is, the human being should be sort of knocked over, and just in awe, in the original sense of the word awe, like the dread of death awe, that there's just something so much bigger than you. So it's a celebration and remembrance of the thing that actually did happen. It's a celebration of something real, a recollection of it, a memory of it. So it is about that, even if it is not immediately reproducing, because it is in the context of that, and it can be calling back to the thing that happened. When it's not that, when it's simply divorced from that intentionally, when you are taking steps to try to make sure it has nothing to do with it, that's when you fall into the problem of it isn't really anything at all at that point. And that's where you have this. So, just to explain in the brief connection where it started about art, destroying art is something similar. Most people, there's art they don't get, or art that's unrelated to their beliefs and religions and causes and so on, just still will recognize pretty things and figure, well, that's kind of interesting, if nothing else. You can see enormous numbers of people going to see religious art who are not of the religion in question, for religions that don't do ugly art. Most don't. Some do, but most don't. And that fact means that it's atypical, even in cases where you have people who are, in control of religious art that's, not of their religion. And so that somebody will let you smash a 1,000-year-old statue, or 2,000-year-old statue, proves that you really are powerful. Because, so I'm taking the case of ISIS, like, the fact that you are in control of an area enough that you can go and smash the pagan statue really demonstrates you have power, because no one would normally let you do this. That's not a typical thing. So clearly, you must genuinely have power if you can go and do this sort of thing that normally people would never let you do and put you in prison for. So that was the analogy to it. Why are people iconoclastic in that sort of destructive sense of stuff that doesn't make any sense, like going out into the desert and finding the art that no one ever looks at anyway and smashing that. Why is it not enough to simply not go to church, but you have to go and smash what's in the churches? it's an exercise of power that demonstrates that you really have the power. You really are an important person because you can do these destructive things that only the most important people can do. And that was the analogy. Hopefully that's a relatively clear analogy and may shed a little light in both directions. So, in conclusion, that's why people are into this thing that I, may be fairly mystifying. And sort of on a related note, just as a general rule, whenever you want to understand anything which is a variation, always start with what the real thing that it's a variation of is, because that will always shed the clearest light on what the variation, deviation, perversion, etc. is of the original. And so, with that said, until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.